back to basics with our starters. I still just see endless confusion on this topic. You cannot feed your starter 1-1-1 once a day and let it sit there forever. Some people's starters do not fall after they come to peak, so then they assume that they don't need to feed it yet because it hasn't fallen. Not true. Once your starter stops expanding and hasn't moved for 30 minutes, it has peaked. It is no longer going to grow. And even if it doesn't fall, the bacteria, the acidity is getting stronger and stronger and is going to eventually create a weak starter. If you are committed to feeding your starter every day, you got to feed it twice a day. You just do. You wake up in the morning and you feed it. Before you go to bed, you feed it. Something like that. 9 p.m., 9 a.m., whatever works for you. You don't have to do this. You can put your starter in the fridge. But if you are someone who wants to keep their starter on the counter because you've read a lot that it's better to do so, I personally agree. I don't like putting my starter at all in the fridge. Then you can maintain it daily by keeping a tiny jar so that you're not constantly feeding and using a lot of flour. What does that even mean? Well, if you have a jar of starter sitting on your counter and you feed it, and you go to work and you have dinner and you come back and you fed it 10 hours ago and you don't want to bake bread that day, so you just leave it there. Well, the next day it's been 24 hours since you fed it and it's gotten very acidic. You look at it and you go, all right, fine, I'll feed you again because you're getting acidic. Then you have to discard, because if you have this amount and you feed it this amount again, then you're going to have a lot of starters. So unless you're going to bake with it, you're going to continue making more and more and more and more and more. And then not only will you feel bad for wasting flour, but you'll feel a lot of pressure from this starter to bake. Who wants to feel pressure from their starter to bake? You want to bake when it is your time, when you have time, when you want to bake, when it's enjoyable. So that's why I encourage you to use a tiny jar, because if you have a small jar, you can't fill up more space than what's in that jar. So you'll trick your brain into using only a small amount. If you decide that you want to maintain that starter and feed it every 12 hours or so, you essentially are just going to take most of the starter out of that jar and feed it a little bit. I've posted those ratios and I can share them in the caption. And yeah, you're going to discard every day because you're not trying to grow your starter. On days where you do want to bake, then you wouldn't discard. You would take everything you have in that little jar and feed it up to whatever amount you need for baking. Alternately, if you do not want to feed every day and you want to keep your starter in the fridge, what you can do is you can keep a tiny jar, and then once a week when you want to bake, you take your tiny jar out, you feed it for what you need, pretty much just exactly what you need, and then whatever remnants are stuck in that jar that you use to make your bigger starter, so like this, baking today, so I didn't use my tiny jar, I took what was in my tiny jar, put it in this jar with more flour and water, and let it come to a rise. Once I'm done using this, I'm going to scrape it down, take the tiniest little bit that's left, feed it a little bit of water and a little bit of flour, stir it up, put it in my tiny starter jar, leave it on the counter for 2 hours, put it back in the fridge. If you do this weekly, your starter will be absolutely fine and you won't have any discard. So the two options are, you feed it every day, twice a day. And if it's hot where you live, even more. If you live in the tropics, if you live like in Jamaica, if you live somewhere where it's always hot, you probably should keep your starter in the fridge because you're going to continuously be feeding it. But if you live somewhere where it's moderate, you keep your AC on or your heater on, so during the year, pretty much all the time, your kitchen is at a temperature where you feel comfortable. Then you can feed your starter twice a day, about 12 hours apart, maintain just a little bit, and anytime you want to bake, you just feed it more to make what you need. I really hope this makes sense. Happy sourdough baking.